Hi, I do know some of you, and I look around, and I'm seeing some new faces as well. I have to say with this particular subject that although I've been teaching it for a number of years, I've never been so expansive on it. So I am going to have to look at my notes from time to time, just remind myself of dates and things like that. I'm first of all going to discuss the history of the birthstones that we associate with the Zodiac. And the history is, many people come in, I have the shop Rebel Angel, people come in all the time, and one of the most frequently asked questions is, what's the birthstone for insert star sign or month of the year here? And I often have to look it up, and then they say, but that's not the one I was told. And there's a reason for that. Our history of birthstones goes back thousands of years, and it actually is part of the Judeo-Christian religion, although we would think, if you talk to people now, you would think that this is really anti-Christianity. It was very much part of it to begin with, and prior to that, part of the Jewish religion. The stones that, as we know them today, had their origins in the book of Exodus. And in the book of Exodus, they talk about the high priest Aaron, who wore a breastplate known as the Mosaic breastplate. And it was part of a very intricate jacket he wore, or surplice he wore, where there was a mosaic of 12 stones that were set into this, or possibly worn on top of it. It's, this has been handed down orally for thousands of years before it actually got written down. So we don't know for sure exactly how it was worn, exactly how it looked. There was a second breastplate made for the new temple, the second temple of Jerusalem, which was much later, about 2,000 years later, I believe. And it was a copy of the first one, so there was, that one was historically recorded, because when Jerusalem was invaded in 70 AD, 70 BC, I should look this up, I'm not going to, 70 AD, sorry. It was one of the artifacts that was taken, and it was examined by a man called Josephus, who wrote a history of the Jews at about that period of time. He examined the second one, so he was able to describe what it looked like and actually do diagrams of it. It's been completely lost now. Nobody knows where it is. Too many wars in the world and things disappear. But these 12 stones represented the 12 tribes of Israel. There's some belief that it may have been, the color of the stones may have been associated with the color that each tribe had as its banners. So when the tribes came together, they would put their banner out, and it would be a certain color. So that was probably 12th century AD. They started saying this, so this is an ecclesiastical writing, so we're not entirely sure. Later in the Bible, in the book of Revelations, there is the discussion of the stones of the New Jerusalem. I'm forgetting my words now, not good. The foundation stones of the New Jerusalem. And these foundation stones were almost identical to the stones that were in the breastplate of Aaron. However, they were in a slightly different order. Some of them were slightly different. And then we have the dilemma that 4,000 years ago, understanding of stones, understanding of geology and mineralogy was very different from the way it is now. So many stones, just because they were a green color, would be called the same name. There was a stone called chrysolite. Now chrysolite has been variously translated as topaz, serpentine, and mostly as peridot. So we usually think of chrysolite as peridot now. There are other stones that were translated in different ways. One of them, the Latin translation was sardius, and so many books have translated it to mean sardonyx, But sard is actually, sardonyx is half sard and half onyx. Sard is carnelian. It's a brown sort of form of carnelian, but carnelian, when it's left in the sunlight, gets brighter, turns orange, so it is actually carnelian. When it has onyx, the white onyx, I think most of what we see now on sale is black onyx with sard. But originally, most of what was mined was white onyx on sard, and the white became cameos with the sard as the background. So you know the carvings of cameos, you get that lovely white face over a sort of orangey brown background. And that's from the sardonyx. Most of the translations have been to carnelian, but some of them have been sardonyx, so you get that as well. There's also a number of different interpretations. Emerald has, sorry, not emerald. The word we know is, they call sapphire, which is what's later translated to sapphire. If you read the translations or the explanation of what the stone looked like of the period, it was almost certainly lapis lazuli, because it's described as an opaque stone with little sparkles of gold in it. So that's definitely going to be lapis lazuli, not sapphire. Also, it's fairly, I've been using as my, one of my references, this book by George Frederick Kuntz. Now this is a facsimile edition of a book that was printed in 1913. It's still available if anybody's interested. And he has done some of the most amazing work on looking academically on where the origins, what the origins of the myths and legends we have around crystals comes from. So a lot of his research, because he was very fascinated with the whole idea of the birthstones and the breastplate of Aaron, he's written 2 or 3 chapters just on this subject. And he's done lots of little translations and charts, and there are several charts that show several different stones in the translations. We have different translations in the authorized Catholic version as opposed to the Hebrew version. And now I've forgotten what I was going. Oh yeah, Kuntz was talking about, in particular. Oh, now I've lost it. Sorry. See, fallible.
Deep breaths.
Deep breaths. Yes. I'll mention a little bit more about Kuntz before I try to remember what I was saying. The book for the camera is The Curious Lore of Precious Stones. Kuntz was a mineralogist who kunzite was named after. So I think most of you will probably be familiar with kunzite. And I think to this day, although it's slightly difficult to read in some ways, this is a book that I would highly recommend if you're interested in the folklore and in the legends and the work that went on before, what led to how we use crystals today. This is one of the best books to start looking into. There are loads and loads of books, the translations of A Natural History by Pliny the Elder, Theophrastus's work on stones, Hildegard von Bingen's stones. There are loads and loads of books that are very helpful, but this has a lot of the information in one place, and it's very well researched and very well credited, cited. And Kuntz's belief is that anything that would have been in the original breastplate of Aaron would have been known to the ancient Egyptians. Our first writings on stones all come from ancient Egypt. So he looks at which stones were available to the ancient Egyptians, and he bases his translation on that, then compares it with a lot of other information that comes in later, and various translations, various interpretations of the information. So far you're saying, what does this have to do with birthstones? The reason for talking about this first, before I start going into the detail, is that Josephus and later authors of the Middle Ages, Josephus in the in 70 AD, and later authors started bringing in the idea that the stones that were in the breastplate of Aaron and the stones that were mentioned as the foundation stones of the New Jerusalem were aligned to different apostles, also aligned to different planets and aligned to different energies. And in those days, astrology wasn't considered non-Christian. Astrology was part of the whole way that people came into, their whole belief system included astrology. Astrology fell out of favor probably 17th, 18th century, so it was still being used at this time. So every apostle, every stone, every tribe was also aligned with the month of the year. And the months translate into the astrological signs, the zodiac signs. So we go from there into the zodiac. Most of the stones that were aligned with certain months are aligned. The zodiac sign they're aligned with is the zodiac sign that comes in about the third week of the month. So, for example, January's birthstones will be aligned with Aquarius, which comes in at around the 21st of January. So if anybody wants to know their monthly birthstones as opposed to their astrological ones, you can work it out from that point of view. Now, from there, we go into having, sorry, I've again lost my train of thought. I'm just going to have a quick look at my notes, see if I've left something out. I did talk a bit about the different translations, but I think it might be interesting to know some of the others. So Topazius was one of the stones that was brought in and or mentioned in this. But Topazius was the term used for many green stones. So it could have been peridot, it could have been green serpentine, it could have been topaz. But topaz, as we know it, wasn't known to the ancient Egyptians. So we're not completely sure. Emerald is really easy. Smegardus is the Latin for emerald. That has been the case for thousands of years. And emerald was mined and known at the time. So every translation talks about emerald as emerald. Carbunculus is another one that's used in the early translations. Carbuncle means coal, glowing coal. And it usually meant garnet, because garnet, when you first have garnet, most garnet tumbles down. Most garnet is not mined as such, but is found in riverbeds, dry riverbeds, where it's washed down from mountains and through erosion. So garnets will tend to be very rough and very black when they're found. This resembles a coal, but when they're polished, you get the inner fire, especially with almandine garnet, which is the red one. But it's also confused with ruby in a lot of writings. So it could have been ruby, but we're almost positive that this is going to be garnet. And garnet in the Middle Ages represented the soul's journey because of the polishing and the honing, showing the inner fire, represents our trials and tribulations, bringing us into a state of showing our inner fire, our inner strength, the gold within us. Some of the earliest writings, and this includes Hindu writings as well as writings in the Middle Ages, talk about, or even earlier, Pliny the Elder talks about this. Garnet was considered to be so bright that it would glow in the dark, and people claimed to be able to read by it, by the light of a garnet. Seriously. I already mentioned Sapphirus. The next word, I could only find the Hebrew name for it, which is Yaholim. And the Hebrew, it indicates a green jasper or jade, but some of the translations of Hebrew into other Hebrew talks about Yarsh. I don't have my glasses on, so I'm doing my best here. Yarshva, and that could be onyx or diamond. Kuntz points out that it's very unlikely to have been diamond in the breastplate of Aaron, because there are actually measurements for it, and it would have been a diamond that it would have had to have been about this size to fit into the measurements of the breastplate of Aaron. So it's unlikely to be diamond, it's more likely to have been green jasper or jade. Ligurius, now this is an interesting one. Ligurius, in many, many translations, it was believed to have been the solidified urine of a lynx. Pliny the Elder recognized it for what it was. He didn't realize it was fossilized tree resin, but he thought it was tree resin because it washed in. He understood that it washed into the shore. It was called Ligurius because it was brought through Liguria in Italy on its way through to the Mediterranean. However, the translation is usually, the Egyptians wouldn't have been familiar with it. So it's most likely it was gold zircon, yellow sapphire, or brown agate, according to Kuntz. There's another one that doesn't have, I don't have the Latin name for it, but Sheba was the Hebrew name for it. And this one translates universally as agate, so it would have been an agate. Of that period, there was a beautiful banded agate that was available. It was black and white, and it was most likely this banded agate. The next one, amethystos. Pretty obvious, isn't it? Universally translated as amethyst. It was, amethyst came from the ancient Greek for, it meant not drunken. So originally amethyst was used for preventing inebriation. But in the Hebrew name actually meant dreams and visions, and of course that's another thing that we believe amethyst helps us with, opening the third eye. I've mentioned chrysolite, which is the next one in order. So chrysolite is most likely, or most frequently, translated as peridot. Interestingly, the descriptions of it sound more like citrine. The next one is translated as beryl, and in almost every authority that talks about the stones, it's translated either as beryl or aquamarine. So there's not really, it will always be beryl being, aquamarine being a form of beryl. And finally, jasp, which is going to be jasper. So that one's an easy one as well. Now, if we get into the astrological birthstones using the ancient views of these stones, they may sound, many of them will be very familiar to you, and some of them won't be. Now, it's something I did, I made a decision last night that I didn't have time to get all my props together, so I've literally just grabbed a few small pieces out of the things I have for sale over there to show you what the stones look like. You're very welcome to come up and look more closely. The first sign, if we go, now in the earlier translations, most of these started in March. The year started in March rather than January. I have put this in January because it's much easier for us. Aquarius is the first star sign, starting in January around the 20th. The main stone is garnet. And this is translated throughout as garnet. I have a garnet here which will look black from where you are. If you look at it with the light shining onto it, you'll see that there is a red glow inside. I mean, not like you can read by it, but a red glow. So it is the type of garnet. Garnets come in every color, but this particular garnet is almandine. It's the one we're most familiar with, the really deep red garnet. There are other stones, and I'm going to come back and go into those in a minute. But just for now, I'll talk about the original stones, the ones that come from the breastplate of the High Priest Aaron. The second star sign is Pisces. Pisces from the 19th to 20th. I'm being vague because in some years it actually starts on a different day. It doesn't always start on exactly the same day. It depends on when many planetary things shift. Amethyst is the one that we associate with it. Amethyst is universally, through every translation, amethyst is the Piscean stone. Unfortunately, this is little bitty and you can hardly see it. Aries, the main stone, is bloodstone, but this presents an interesting dilemma as well, because we always think of bloodstone in the West as being a green stone with little red dots on it, which this is. I know you can't see it from where you are, but you're welcome to come up and have a closer look later. However, the literal translation of hematite is bloodstone. Hema, blood, tite, stone. So very often when I get German people in the shop, they ask for hematite and they mean this, or they ask for bloodstone and they mean hematite. So it could be that the original bloodstone was hematite. Add to that the originally the god Mars or Aries was associated with metal, but the metal, specific metal, is iron. Hematite is 70% iron. So it's most likely that it was actually hematite rather than bloodstone. But we look at it, we always translate it as bloodstone now.
And it's red. And it looks red.
Yes, yeah, that's right. If hematite is granular, it oxidizes and you get red. You do get specular hematite, which has that shiny metallic look, which is what we're used to seeing. And I meant to bring that, but I forgot. Thank you. Then I mentioned about, now Taurus was the one that was translated as sapphire, but I did mention that probably the way the stone is described, sapphire was lapis lazuli. So I have a little lapis lazuli egg in reference to Easter. But I also have sapphires in there if anybody wants to have a better look. Gemini has been translated as agate. Agate is usually, the actual translation or the actual definition of agate is a banded chalcedony that has concentric banding. Some of the exceptions are moss agate, there are a few others. I've got a piece of moss agate here. But normally you would expect to see lots of banding, and concentric in that it forms around a center, so it will be going in a circle. This is what defines agate as opposed to onyx, which has straight bandings. It doesn't go in circles, it goes in straight lines. They're both chalcedonies. Now, we usually think of these days the Cancer birthstone being moonstone because it's associated with the moon. But the original one was emerald. This is an emerald. It's not a very good quality one. You probably guessed, because if I had one that was good quality this size, I would probably have it in a case with a lock on it and everything else. But anyway, emerald has been universally translated as the Cancer birthstone. Leo's birthstone is onyx, and here we have one that does demonstrate the straight banding you get with onyx. This is a Mexican onyx. Onyx can be a number of different colors. A lot of people just think of it as black, but onyx can also be white, cream, several colors in between. Virgo, the main stone is carnelian. So carnelian being sard from sardonyx, but usually a brighter orange. We think of it as being a brighter orange. And as I mentioned, sard comes up from the ground looking quite brown. It's left out in the sunlight, and the sun actually bleaches it, so it goes this bright orange. So for Libra, the translation we usually go to now is peridot. And peridot, I only have a teeny weeny little bit of it. Peridot is quite fascinating because it begins life very, very deep in the Earth's mantle. It's one of the deepest forming crystals. Often is spewed out in a pyroclastic explosion where it will be in little lumps inside tufa. And then the Sagittarius birthstone is all, oops, I got it wrong, sorry. Scorpio birthstone is aquamarine. And this is a natural cluster of aquamarine crystals here. Again, you can have a close look at it later if you like. I've missed one. Oh, no, I haven't missed it. My piece of topaz is so tiny that I couldn't see it in the basket when I picked it up. But for Sagittarius, the usual translation is topaz. Now, as I said, there's several translations for each of these, and what I've gone for is the most common translation. And finally, we have Capricorn. Now, this is one that will be different from probably anything anybody else any of you have associated with Capricorn. The main stone is ruby, and this is almost a universal translation. Do any of you have another star sign you'd associate with ruby?
Well, I was going to say Leo.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm a Leo. I'm a Virgo.
Okay, there's a reason for that.
I thought there was.
Leo and Peridot as well.
And Peridot, yes.
Never known about Onyx.
The reason, now I have gone specifically for the ones that were from the breastplate of Aaron and the stones of the foundation stones of the New Jerusalem. However, a lot of changes went on in the early 20th century. And what happened was the Jewelry Association of America noticed that certain stones weren't selling, people weren't buying birthstones anymore because that is when it had gone out of favor. They were considered to be a little bit, not quite Christian, not quite the thing we do. And so people had stopped buying them. So at this point, they met in 1912, and they made a decision that they would name the monthly birthstones rather than astrological birthstones or zodiac birthstones. And they changed some of them. And one of the most notable changes, one of the other translations, it's not very common, but one of the other Leo stones is turquoise from the original writings. And they deemed that ruby was too warm a color for December, and turquoise was too cool a color for summer, so they swapped them. So ever since then, everybody's been using the Capricorn stones for Leo and the Leo stones for Capricorn. Now, there's some other interesting things about the way we ended up going into having the birthstones and how people started using them. We didn't actually start wearing them in a talismanic way until the 18th or 19th century, possibly the 17th. And it started in Poland, and this was because a lot of Jewish people moved to Poland at that time. They brought with them the idea of the stones of the New Jerusalem and also the stones of the breastplate of Aaron, primarily the breastplate of Aaron, and they started associating them more with the monthly birthstones. However, they were written about from the time of Josephus as being monthly and being associated with astrological signs. But people didn't wear them. And the reason people didn't wear them is most stones were worn in those days for healing purposes. Almost everybody wore their stones either to help them, protect them, help them to gain something that they're looking for, draw abundance, etc., or specific healing properties that they were offering. So it wasn't until crystal healing fell out of favor they started wearing the birthstones talismanically. Going back, I hope I can read these because as I said, I left my reading glasses in the other room, and unfortunately I'm of a certain age and I can no longer read things close up. When we started getting, apart from the stones that I've already mentioned where there was a lot of confusion in translation, and apart from what was brought in by the National Jewelry Association of America in 1912, the other stones that have been brought in as astrological birthstones are all recent. They all evolved in the 20th century. mainly through the mainly through people like Melody writing about them and saying this a lot. This resonates with such and such a birth sign. Now, if we look through them, most of those stones will be based on the element of the star sign. Not all of them, but most of them will be based on the element of the star sign. So a fire sign will be assigned fiery stones like carnelian, citrine, topaz, sunstone, etc. A water sign will be assigned water stones like moonstone. Now, interestingly, moonstone comes from somewhere else. Moonstone was from the birthstones assigned in the Ayurvedic system, and we drew on that. But a lot of the Ayurvedic birthstones are very similar to the stones of the breastplate of Aaron. So you will see there'll be a certain correspondence between them. But it was the Ayurvedic system that brought in moonstone, which was very popular in India. So that has now become usually considered to be the main Cancer birthstone. Other stones as examples for Aquarius. Now, Aquarius is an air sign, so some of these don't make sense to me. Baltic amber I usually associate with fire and warmth. But amethyst, angelite, aquamarine, cavansite, all of those you can sort of see have a correlation with air. They have correlation with other elements as well, but you can see the correlation with air. Pisces, it's water. The stones tend to be blue lace agate, angelite, aquamarine, but then a few other odd ones like bloodstone, blue calcite again. So you can see where these have come from, and it's fine if you want to look at it that way. Kuntz has a really strong sort of comment that he doesn't like that things have been changed around, because he feels that everything has been in place for so many thousands of years that by taking this away, by changing it, is sort of belittling our history, belittling our traditions and where things have come from. And I do tend to agree with him. I am Capricorn. I'm wearing ruby. I love ruby. I love it anyway. I would wear it even if it wasn't a Capricorn birthstone. But it's I feel very, very drawn to it. The other thing is, I would also say that you're not necessarily going to be benefited by wearing your birthstone. Birthstones will be enhancing your element, or in a lot of cases. If you're a fire sign and you're really fiery, that's my husband. My husband's all fire. So slightest thing sets him off. He wears all water stones, and he needs to. If he doesn't wear water stones, yeah, keeps him calm. And he knows this, so he does this. The other element, the other side of this birthstones, sorry, I don't need to talk about that bit. I think I didn't put this in my notes, so I will have to talk off the top of my head. But in astrology, how many of you really follow astrology? Are there one person, two? Three, okay. There's a few of you here. Astrology, with astrology, you probably know, if you're following it, that your ascendant or rising sign and your moon are almost as important as your natal sign or your sun sign. So people like Judy Hall look at how to enhance the whole of the astrological portrait of you. So you would be looking at things like what is your moon and what stones enhance that moon sign. And equally, if there's something that's too strong in that, you might have that as your moon, but it's also something else in your chart or whatever, and you need to calm it down. Just like I said with my husband and the firestones, it's finding the opposite, the complementary stone, rather than the one that enhances that particular quality that will help you out. I recommend that, and looking at that rather than looking at your birth sign and thinking, I must wear this stone because I am blah, 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 blah. So that's that is pretty much all I had to say on the subject. I welcome any questions and I'll do my best to answer them.
One thing I'd like to ask, because I'm very new to sort of trying to wear stones, and is it important to wear a stone on your skin?
No. The stones are really powerful. This is something, I know you look at some of the books, there was some books by Jeffrey Keats, for example. He has, I think, actually nude women in them, and you look at books by Michael Ginger, and a lot of his books will have the person draped as though they were having a massage with oils, etc. The crystals are incredibly powerful, and just having them in your energy field is going to make a difference. Part of the way I work is doing crystal massage, and we do it over clothing. We don't actually undress the client because the clothing, the crystals are powerful enough to go through the clothing. We don't actually need to have them directly against the
So
skin.
wearing them on your wrist, finger, earrings, they're all helpful as well as...
It's fine, yeah, it's fine. And in some cases, I would say there are certain crystals like malachite which work better if they're right against the skin. And this is an interesting one. How many of you have read the misinformation on the web at the moment saying malachite's highly toxic and you shouldn't touch it? Oh, nobody's seen it. That's good. Thank you. Thank you, universe, because it upset me really badly when I saw that, and it's been going around doing the rounds around the internet. Malachite was used by the ancient Egyptians to fight infection. It's a copper ore. Copper is bacteriostatic. Malachite itself is bacteriostatic. It's been proven. This isn't, a bit of woo-woo stuff I pulled out of the air. This is actually documented. There are 37 references to malachite in the Ebers Papyrus, almost all of which were to treat eye infection because they were very prone to eye infection. Malachite can be dangerous if you powder it and then you inhale the powder, but I don't recommend it. It's actually really good against the skin. It's an incredible anti-inflammatory, so it's really good if people have fevers, and it's also really good for things like arthritis, where you have an inflammatory condition of the joints. So something like this can actually help to reduce inflammation if you wear it right against the skin or hold it right against the skin. To say it's too toxic to touch is just scary. So, and some crystals work faster than others. So there are some crystals I wouldn't wear just because they knock the top of my head off and I'll end up away with the fairies all day, which is a lovely, blissful way to be, but not necessarily good for when you're trying to work or teach people. But they're good for meditation when you're trying to go somewhere. Your journey meditation, when you're holding something like Super 7 or a phenakite, which is really powerful, takes you out and takes you wherever you want to go. You just need to bring yourself back, but I wouldn't wear it for that reason. Any other questions?
Can I just ask, I might have missed this, about the original breastplate, the different stones. What was their reason for having that in the first place?
It represented the 12 tribes of Israel. And it was in 12th century ecclesiastical writings, it was suggested that this was because each color represented the banner that was used by each of the tribes. So when they came together in the desert, each one would have the banner up to identify which tribe they were. And Aaron would wear the breastplate with every single tribe represented on it.
And they were related to the signs, were they?
They were later on they were related to the months of the year and then the star signs.
Why did that, if I'm going to track, but why did that develop into that, I wonder?
Well, astrology was acceptable at the time, and there were other writings which I haven't mentioned. The Venerable Bede, for example, wrote about the stones of the foundation stones of the New Jerusalem. And he talks about them, each one being aligned with an apostle and giving their different qualities. And there's loads and loads of writing about the different qualities, but they then were associated with, the apostles were associated with months of the year. Each archangel was associated with a month of the year. So in those days, when you were born, you were given a natal angel as well, and the angel was associated with the stone. It all fit together. Thank you, because you reminded me of a few bits I left out of the talk.
So the idea of having those tokens is for what purpose? To give?
To bring the qualities of the, either the tribe or the qualities of the archangel associated, the qualities of, and some of the, I think one of the translations or one of the writings said that I can't remember which group, but they didn't like the fact that different apostles were given the qualities of the stones of New Jerusalem. So they said each one represented a quality of Christ. So that was this quality and that quality, and there was a whole poem written about it in the Middle Ages.
And of course there hadn't been quite so many found by that time either.
No, and because they didn't understand things like, we use different things to, diagnostic techniques to tell what the stones are. So we look at the way they break, we look at the color, we look at the way light refracts out of it, we look at specific gravity, it goes on and on and on. And we can tell that this thing might be, this will be peridot, but this one will be serpentine, because we know how the crystal will react to certain conditions. They didn't know those things, they just saw a green stone that looked similar to another green stone. So they would both have the same name.
It's interesting what you were saying about the Malachites earlier, because in the kind of fight in hospitals against MRSA, that they're again looking at copper compounds, contemplating going back to using brass handles rather than steel handles because they don't spread the bacteria.
They've already brought that into the US, so a lot of hospitals in the US have everything that's touched by many people have a copper alloy. For that very reason.
Yeah.
Very good point. Anything else? Everybody fine? I did print up some sheets with the astrological birthstones and the other stones, and I think I had to leave off the Ayurvedic ones. I'm sorry, I couldn't get it all to fit onto two sides of one sheet. So it's anyway. They're available on my stand in there, so if anybody wants them there, you can come and take one.
Thank you.
Thank you.